There are men who are born to govern, and there are men who are born to rot everything they touch. Tarek El-Aissami is one of the latter. His resume looks like that of a respectable statesman. Deputy, Minister of the Interior, Governor, Vice President of the Republic, Minister of Petroleum, an impeccable career on paper, the dream of any politician with ambitions. But there is another resume, the one that doesn't appear in the official biographies, the one written in the files of the DEA, the FBI, the U.S. Department of the Treasury, the one that places him on the list of the most wanted drug traffickers in the Western Hemisphere, the one that connects his name with Hezbollah, with Islamic terrorism, with tons of cocaine crossing the Caribbean bound for the coasts of Florida, $10 million. That's the reward that the United States offers for information leading to his capture. We're not talking about a drug lord hidden in some mountain in Colombia. We're talking about a man who was vice president of Venezuela, who worked in the Miraflores Palace, who sat next to Nicolas Maduro in official acts while the whole world knew he was one of the most dangerous criminals on the continent. How is that possible? How did a drug trafficker accused of protecting cocaine routes become the second most powerful man in Venezuela? How did a man accused of handing out passports to Hezbollah terrorists control for years the ministry that issued those passports? How did an official with frozen accounts around the world manage the largest oil industry in Latin America? The answer is simple and terrifying. Because the system allowed it. Because the system needed it. Because in Chavismo, crimes do not disqualify. They qualify. But this story has a twist that no one expected. Today, as I record this video, Tarek El-Aissami is not on a yacht in the Caribbean counting his millions. He's not in Iran protected by his Hezbollah friends. He's not in Russia waiting for the storm to pass. He's in a Venezuelan cell, arrested by the same regime that protected him for decades, accused of stealing $17,000 million from the state oil company, presented before the cameras as a common criminal by the same people who promoted him to the vice presidency. What happened? What did Tarek El-Aissami do to fall from grace after being untouchable for 20 years? The answer has to do with the night of January 3, 2026, with the capture of Nicolas Maduro by U.S. forces, with a betrayal that was discovered too late, with a man who tried to be the next president of Venezuela and ended up being the next prisoner. Before continuing, I need to ask you something. What you're about to hear connects the Venezuelan government with international networks of drug trafficking and terrorism. These are not made-up accusations. They are court files from U.S. federal courts. They are declassified intelligence reports. They are testimonies from drug traffickers who decided to talk before dying. This story makes many governments uncomfortable. That's why the algorithm buries it. If you believe these truths deserve to come to light, subscribe to the channel Silent Chambers and turn on the bell. Your click is the only thing that can break the silence. To understand how Tarek El-Aissami became the most dangerous man in Venezuela, we have to start from the beginning. We have to go to a dusty town in the Andes. We have to meet a father who didn't come to Venezuela seeking the American dream. He came with a mission. El Vigía, Mérida State, a town in the Venezuelan Andes where the mountains touch the clouds and immigrants arrive seeking a quiet life, far from the conflicts of the Middle East. To that town came Zaidan Amin El-Aissami in the mid-20th century. But Zaidan was not a common immigrant. He wasn't fleeing war. He wasn't seeking opportunities. He wasn't coming to plant coffee or open a business to live in peace. Zaidan came with a mission, and that mission had a name, the Ba'ath Party, the same party as Saddam Hussein. The Arab Socialist Ba'ath was an organization that combined Arab nationalism, socialism, and anti-imperialism. Its goal was to unify the Arab world under a single flag, expel Western influence, and build a power bloc capable of confronting the United States and Israel. In Iraq, that party took power and produced one of the bloodiest dictators of the 20th century. Zaidan El-Aissami was its representative in Venezuela. According to investigations by security expert Joseph Humire, Zaidan arrived in Venezuela as an extension of the Ba'ath Party to connect with Latin American revolutionary movements. He wasn't an appliance salesman who did politics on weekends. He was a professional militant whose family had direct connections with the power elite in Baghdad. His great-uncle Shibli El-Aissami was the deputy secretary general of the Iraqi Ba'ath Party in the era of Saddam Hussein. We're not talking about a distant relative, we're talking about the dictator's inner circle. Zaidan settled his family in the El Carmen neighborhood of El Vigía. He opened a small appliance store on Avenida 4 in Mérida. From the outside, he looked like a humble merchant. From the inside, he was the head of the Venezuelan section of the most dangerous political party in the Arab world and raised his children with that ideology. Under the pseudonym Carlos Zaidan, Tarek's father wrote articles defending Saddam Hussein, glorifying Islamic Jihad, praising the holy war of al-Qaeda. Before the U.S. invasion of Iraq, he appeared in a press conference referring to Osama bin Laden as the great Mujahid, the Sheikh Osama bin Laden. It wasn't empty rhetoric, it was deep conviction. On February 4th, 1992, when Hugo Chavez launched his failed coup against Carlos Andrés Pérez, the El Aissami house was raided by the police. Zaidan was detained. It wasn't a coincidence. The authorities knew that this Syrian-Lebanese immigrant had connections with the coup-plotting military. Tarek was 17 years old. He was in his 5th year of high school at the Jorgi Military High School in La Grita, Táchira State. The image of his father being dragged away by the police was etched in his memory forever. That night, he learned 2 lessons. First, power protects. Without power, you are vulnerable. Second, there was a revolution brewing in Venezuela, and his family was already part of it. Zaidan not only shaped Tarek in the Ba'ath ideology, he connected him to a network that spanned continents, contacts in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iran, Iraq, a web of relationships that the son would inherit and expand until turning it into a highway for drug trafficking and terrorism. The father planted the seed, the son turned it into a poison forest. The University of the Andes in Mérida was, in the late 90s, a hotbed of radical ideas. In its hallways, leftist students mingled with sympathizers of the Colombian guerrilla, militants of revolutionary movements, and professors who saw in Hugo Chavez the hope for a continental transformation. It was the perfect place for a young man with Tarek El Aissami's connections and training. He came to study law and criminology, but his real education wasn't in the textbooks. It was in the clandestine meetings, in the student residences where, according to testimonies collected by investigators, members of the Colombian FARC and armed groups that operated in the shadow of a university that for decades had been a refuge for national and foreign guerrillas took shelter. El Aissami not only approached those groups, he protected them, organized them, armed them. According to sources cited by the portal Infobay, his university leadership was not just ideological. He formed groups that responded to his interests and included elements from the DISIP, the Venezuelan political police. In his early 20s, Tarek was already building his own power network, but the encounter that changed his destiny happened in a classroom. Adán Chavez, Hugo Chavez's older brother, was a professor at the ULA. It was he who took the young student of Arab origin under his wing. It was he who connected him directly to the political project that his younger brother was building. It was he who opened the doors that would take El Aissami from the mountains of Mérida to the Miraflores Palace. He became president of the Law Students Center, then president of the Federation of University Centers. He founded the student movement Utopia 78. He graduated with academic honors. On paper, a brilliant student. In reality, a political operator who already had one foot in power. When Chavez won the elections in 1998, El Aissami was already part of the National Directorate of the Youth of the Fifth Republic movement. He was 24 years old and positioned for the ascent. In 2003, Hugo Chavez gave him his first important position, head of the Identity Mission. It seems like a bureaucratic post. It wasn't. The Identity Mission was responsible for issuing IDs and identification documents to millions of Venezuelans and also, conveniently, to undocumented foreigners that the government wanted to regularize. It was the gateway to the entire country's identity system. El Aissami worked under Hugo Cabezas, his Utopia 78 comrade, who had been appointed director of the National Office of Identification and Foreigners known as ONIDEX. Together they controlled who was Venezuelan and who wasn't, who could have a passport and who couldn't, who could enter the country and who couldn't. The complaints didn't take long to arrive. In 2003, a U.S. official declared to U.S. News and World Report that several thousand people from terrorism-sponsoring countries were obtaining Venezuelan identifications, while El Aissami was part of the ONIDEX leadership. The list included citizens from Syria, Egypt, Pakistan, and Lebanon. The New York District Attorney, Robert Morgenthau, would accuse him years later of providing passports to members of Hamas and Hezbollah while controlling the documents agency. They weren't vague accusations, they were files with names, ID numbers, dates, 173 false identifications delivered to people linked to terrorism and drug trafficking. The young radical from the ULA had found his first business, and he was just beginning. In 2005, Tarek El Aissami was elected deputy for Mérida State. 2 years later, Hugo Chavez appointed him Vice Minister of Citizen Security, and in September 2008, at just 33 years old, he became Minister of Interior Relations and Justice. The man who had facilitated passports to terrorists now controlled all of Venezuela's police. But El Aissami didn't arrive alone at that ministry. He arrived at the exact moment when Venezuela was becoming the new global cocaine highway. For decades, Colombia had been the hemispheric center of drug trafficking, but Plan Colombia, funded by the United States, was closing the traditional routes. The cartels needed new paths, and Venezuela, with its thousands of kilometers of Caribbean coast, its airports without real surveillance, and its government willing to look the other way, was the perfect paradise. The man who best understood this opportunity was named Walid Maqled. He was a Venezuelan businessman of Syrian origin. He started selling appliances just like El Aissami's father. But unlike Zaidan, Walid wasn't interested in politics, he was interested in money, and he discovered that the most profitable business in Venezuela wasn't oil, it was cocaine. By 2008, Maqled controlled the warehouses and docks of Puerto Cabello, the country's largest port. He had the rights to distribute urea throughout the national territory, a fertilizer that also serves as a precursor for making explosives. He owned Aeropostale, one of Venezuela's largest airlines, and according to the DEA, he was the third most wanted drug trafficker in the world. But Maqled didn't operate alone. He operated with generals, with governors, with ministers. In October 2010, after being captured in Colombia, Maqled began to talk, and what he said shook the foundations of Chavismo. He declared to the newspaper El Nacional that he had paid $100,000 to Fares El Aissami, Tarek's brother, to manipulate the police in Aragua state. He explained that the money was deposited into an account in Margarita. He said he had a copy of the voucher. He claimed he had video of the meeting, but that wasn't all. Maqled revealed that Fares had asked him for more business, that they were interested in buying an oil tanker, that they needed money, and were willing to get it anyway. When DEA agents interviewed him in the Combita prison in Colombia, Maqled was even more specific. He declared that between 2007 and 2012, he regularly paid Fares El Aissami to invest drug trafficking money in the Venezuelan oil industry. The brother of the Minister of the Interior laundering drug money in PDVSA, it wasn't a minor accusation, it was dynamite. A Chavista journalist named Alberto Nolia, host of the program Los Papeles de Mandinga on the state channel VTV, made the mistake of investigating. In 2011, he publicly denounced that Fares El Aissami had $21 million in the Swiss bank HSBC. The program was canceled on August 30th of that year. The journalist received death threats. The military man, Gerardo Goyo Regardes, a participant in the February 4 coup, along with Tarek's father, also denounced Fares's accounts. He showed proof that the minister's brother had exactly $689,000 in Switzerland, coming from currency crimes, corruption, and drug trafficking. No one investigated him, no one prosecuted him, no one touched him because touching Fares was touching Tarek, and touching Tarek was touching Chavez. When the president was asked about Maqled's accusations, his response was unequivocal. He went on national chain to defend his minister. He called him honest, transparent, a true revolutionary. Maqled was extradited to Venezuela instead of the United States. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison, and the evidence he promised to deliver about the generals, the ministers, the governors, never saw the light of day. The message was clear. In Chavismo, loyalty is rewarded and snitching is punished. On January 4, 2017, Nicolas Maduro made an announcement that left the world stunned. He named Tarek El Aissami as vice president of Venezuela. The second most powerful man in the country, the automatic successor if something happened to Maduro, the face of the Bolivarian revolution to the world, a man over whom years of investigations for drug trafficking hung. A man whose links to Hezbollah were documented in DEA, FBI, and Treasury Department files. A man whose brother had been accused of laundering drug trafficking money. That man now worked in the Miraflores Palace. The United States response came 5 weeks later. On February 13, 2017, the Office of Foreign Assets Control of the Department of the Treasury designated Tarek El Aissami as an international drug trafficker under the Kingpin Act. He was the highest-ranking Venezuelan official to receive that designation up to that point. The accusations were devastating. El Aissami had facilitated narcotics shipments from Venezuela. He had controlled planes that took off from military air bases loaded with cocaine. He had supervised drug routes through the country's ports. He had been partial owner of shipments of more than 1,000 Getladis sent to Mexico and the United States. He wasn't an official who looked the other way. He was an active partner of the cartels. The Treasury Department also sanctioned Samark Lopez Bello, identified as El Aissami's main front man. Lopez Bello was in charge of laundering the money, acquiring properties, handling the finances. 13 companies linked to him were blocked, but the sanctions revealed something deeper than drug trafficking. U.S. investigators had documented the connection between El Aissami and Hezbollah. The main link was a man named Ghazi Nasser al-Din, also known as Ghazi Nassereddin. Born in Beirut, naturalized Venezuelan in 1998, Nassereddin had worked at the Venezuelan embassy in Damascus, Syria. From there, he organized meetings with Hezbollah officials and facilitated the issuance of Venezuelan passports to operatives of the terrorist group. The FBI placed him on its most wanted list. It identified him as a direct collaborator of Tarek El Aissami in drug trafficking. But Nassereddin didn't work alone. His brother Ghassan also participated in the operation. Both recruited Arab Venezuelans to send them to southern Lebanon to receive military training in Hezbollah camps. They formed fighters, expanded espionage networks, prepared operatives to act throughout Latin America, and El Aissami gave them cover from the ministry that controlled passports, IDs, and visas. Between 2008 and 2012, when El Aissami was Minister of the Interior, at least 173 suspicious documents were issued to people linked to Hezbollah, Hamas, and Al-Qaeda. By 2019, U.S. investigators estimated that more than 10,000 Venezuelan passports had been illegally delivered to citizens of Syria, Iran, and Lebanon. Venezuela had become a franchise of international terrorism. The Al-Manar television channel, the official organ of Hezbollah in Lebanon, did not hide its enthusiasm. It described El Aissami as a great friend of the Lebanese resistance. It promoted him as the future leader of Venezuela. It presented him as the man who would keep alive the alliance between Caracas, Tehran, and Beirut. The son of the Ba'ath Party militant had completed his father's mission. He had connected Venezuela to the terrorist networks of the Middle East. He had turned the country into a base of operations for Hezbollah. He had created a conduit to launder drug trafficking money and finance jihad. Maduro responded to the U.S. sanctions with a closed defense of his vice president. He called him a victim of imperialism, kept him in office. He granted him extraordinary economic powers that no vice president had had before. But El Aissami wanted more. He wanted the oil. In April 2020, in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, Nicolas Maduro gave El Aissami the grand prize. He named him Minister of Petroleum. PDVSA, the state oil company, was the jewel in the Venezuelan crown. For decades, it had been the source of almost all the country's income, and now it was in the hands of a man sanctioned by the United States as an international drug trafficker. The assignment was clear: bypass U.S. sanctions and keep the money flowing to the regime. El Aissami had the perfect solution: cryptocurrencies. In 2020, the regime pushed a law that allowed financial operations without traditional controls, supposedly to evade the U.S. embargo. Experts warned that it was an invitation to corruption. They were right. El Aissami created a system where oil sales were channeled through the National Superintendency of Crypto Assets. Payments arrived in cryptocurrencies, were converted to cash, and disappeared in a tangle of ghost companies impossible to trace. There were no audits, no controls, no supervision. There was only El Aissami deciding who bought Venezuelan oil and at what price. The witnesses who later declared before the prosecutor's office described the system in chilling detail. El Aissami directly assigned crude shipments without any administrative process. He charged millionaire commissions in cash and gold. He used briefcase companies to handle the money at will. He ordered the creation of a foreign company through which all crude purchase operations would pass. In the office of one of his collaborators, witnesses saw stacks of cash dollars. When the new PDVSA president, Colonel Pedro Tellechea, took office in January 2023 and began reviewing the accounts, he discovered a black hole: billions of dollars in accounts receivable that no one could explain, oil shipments sent without payment records, ghost operations that only existed on paper. According to Transparencia Venezuela, the total embezzlement between 2020 and 2023 exceeded $17,000 million. $17,000 million. To put it in perspective, with that money, a salary of $100 monthly could have been paid to 1 million public employees for 6 years. In a country where people line up to get food, where hospitals have no medicines, where millions have fled misery. Meanwhile, Tarek's brother, Faris El Aissami, lived in a mansion in Carrasco, the most exclusive neighborhood in Montevideo. In October 2018, the Uruguayan program Santo Iseña revealed that he had rented a house for $4,000 monthly, paying $48,000 in advance through a transfer from Venezuela. His wife drove a high-end SUV. His children attended an elite private school. When journalists asked Faris what he lived on in Uruguay, he replied that he did nothing, that he had companies in Venezuela. The El Aissami family had completed the perfect looting. But in March 2023, something changed. On March 17th, the detentions began. PDVSA officials, military personnel, judges, businessmen, all linked to El Aissami's circle, fell. On March 20th, Tarek posted a message on Twitter announcing his resignation from the ministry to support the investigations. It was his last social media post. After that, he disappeared. For 386 days, no one knew where Tarek El-Aissami was. Rumors circulated that he was hidden in Fuerte Tiuna, the largest military complex in Caracas, that he had fled to Iran, that he was secretly negotiating with the United States, that Maduro had him under surveillance waiting for the right moment to act. The official silence was absolute until April 9, 2024. That day, Attorney General Tarek William Saab appeared on television with a trophy. He showed photographs and videos of El-Aissami handcuffed, dressed in a t-shirt and sweatpants, escorted by 2 hooded police officers. The man who had been vice president, Minister of the Interior, oil czar, was now exhibited as a common criminal. The charges were devastating: treason against the homeland, appropriation of public assets, money laundering, criminal association. But what Saab revealed went further. He accused El-Aissami of conspiring to overthrow Nicolas Maduro, of allying with the Venezuelan opposition and U.S. officials, of using his front man, Samark Lopez, as a link to negotiate a political transition that would place him in power, and he presented evidence. Audios recorded in 2020 of conversations between Samark Lopez and opposition leaders like Julio Borges and Carlos Vecchio. 40 hours of recordings where they discussed plans to provoke an uprising, where they talked about building bridges toward a transition, where they acknowledged that Maduro would do everything to stay, but they had other plans. The prosecutor identified James Story, the U.S. official who ran the Office for Venezuelan Affairs from Colombia, as the link with Washington in this alleged conspiracy. The irony was brutal. El-Aissami, the man whom the United States had sanctioned as a drug trafficker, the man for whose head they offered $10 million, had been secretly negotiating with that same government to lead the post-Maduro transition. Leopoldo Lopez, the exiled opposition leader, confirmed the conversations. He admitted that he had spoken with Samark Lopez and with many other people from the regime. He said he had always been willing to build bridges toward democracy, but he distanced himself from the corruption. Maduro's message was clear. He proposed a constitutional reform to include life imprisonment for traitors and the corrupt. He asked to be implacable with those who betray the people. Jorge Rodriguez, president of the National Assembly, demanded 30 years in prison for El-Aissami. Analysts understood what was happening. It wasn't just a corruption case. It was a purge. It was a message within Chavismo. You can steal, but you can't conspire to replace the boss. El-Aissami's real sin wasn't stealing $17,000 million. It was believing he could use that money and those connections to become the next president. Maduro had discovered it, and now El-Aissami was paying the price. The man who had sold passports to terrorists, who had protected cocaine routes, who had connected Venezuela to Hezbollah, who had looted the largest oil company in Latin America, didn't fall for any of those crimes. He fell because he wanted to betray the one who had protected him for 20 years. On January 3, 2026, everything changed. At 2 a.m. Caracas time, the Venezuelan sky filled with explosions. U.S. planes bombed the La Carlota Air Base, the Shalav Air Base, military installations in La Guaira and Higuerote. Operation Absolute Termination had begun, 47 seconds. That's how long it took the U.S. Army's Delta Force to capture Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia Flores in Fuerte Tiuna, the same military complex where, according to reports, Tarek El-Aissami had been hidden during his year of disappearance. Maduro was taken out of Venezuela by helicopter, transferred to the USS Igima ship, taken to the Guantanamo base, and finally to New York to face charges of drug trafficking and narco-terrorism. The same accusations that had hung over El-Aissami since 2017. The dictator who had protected the drug czar now shared his fate, prisoner awaiting trial in the United States. But there is a crucial difference. Maduro is in a federal court in New York. El-Aissami is still in a Venezuelan cell. What does Tarek El-Aissami know? He knows every cocaine route that crossed Venezuela for 2 decades. He knows the names of the generals of the Cartel of the Suns. He has the details of the connections with Hezbollah, with Iran, with Syria. He knows the offshore accounts where billions of dollars were hidden. He knows who received false passports and who paid for them. He is possibly the most valuable witness that exists about the Venezuelan narco-state. The question now is, what will they do with him? Will they extradite him to the United States to testify against Maduro and the rest of the Chavista elite? Will he negotiate information in exchange for a reduced sentence? Or will the new Venezuelan government, led by Delcy Rodriguez and Diosdado Cabello, while organizing a transition, prefer to keep him silent forever? Because Tarek El-Aissami not only knows Maduro's secrets, he knows everyone's secrets. Think about the arc of this story. A father arrives in Venezuela as an agent of the Ba'ath Party, Saddam Hussein's party. He raises his son in the ideology of radical anti-imperialism. That son enters university, meets the Chavezes, becomes a political operator, controls the country's passports and sells them to terrorists. He becomes a partner of drug traffickers, rises to the vice presidency, controls the oil, steals $17,000 million, tries to betray his boss to become president, and ends up in a cell. The father planted the seed of destruction. The son turned it into a criminal empire, and that empire collapsed when he wanted to grow too much. There is a final irony in this story. Tarek El-Aissami spent years selling false passports to people who wanted to escape their countries, hide their identities, start new lives. Now he is the one who would need a false passport to escape. And he doesn't have one? $10 million for his head, $17,000 million stolen, hundreds of tons of cocaine facilitated, thousands of passports delivered to terrorists, connections with Hezbollah, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, decades of crimes documented in DEA, FBI, Treasury Department files, one single man. The question that remains is whether that man will end up in a New York court, telling everything he knows, or if he will die in a Venezuelan cell taking his secrets to the grave. If this video helped you understand how an entire country can be hijacked by a criminal family, subscribe to the channel Silent Chambers, share it, turn on the bell. The algorithm wants to bury these stories. Your click is the only thing that can keep them alive because the truth about Venezuela is just coming to light. And Tarek El-Aissami is just the beginning. All videos. Author Silent Chambers. Political news, international news. For you recently published viewed.